Luciferius asks, how are you making your campaigns replayable in CMBW and in future titles? Basically, there's a gradient, and like the further you go towards replayability, the harder it is for newcomers to adjust. Because we expect newcomers, people who've never played CMBW before, or never played our other titles before, or just not really that fond of RTS games, but they're giving it a shot. We actually expect them to lose even in like the tutorial content, especially if they're not very mechanically gifted, shall we say, and they don't really know what the patterns of an RTS are. But that failure is necessary for them to learn, and it's also extending a very early invitation that says, hey, you don't know what this game is about yet, and you need to learn what this game is about. And there's a natural ebb and flow to that learning, and we're not going to condescend to you by telling you how to move the mouse, because we expect that you've used a computer before if you're playing an RTS game. Instead, what we're going to do in our tutorial content is give you this sandbox, have a slower paced enemy that is still trying to defeat you and will indeed defeat you if you give them the advantage. You'll get a lot of terrain advantage, right? You can like have really thin choke points to funnel your enemies down. You can, use height to your advantage. Maybe you can there's a cliff that they have to go through a valley or something. You could put defenses on either side, almost like tower defense is a scary term to use in an RTS context, but similar enough to that in that sense where you can use a low skill and obvious maneuver, which doesn't require a lot of APM and doesn't require a lot of micromanaging. You can just make some strategic decisions that are fairly obvious that we don't need to tell you about. We can hint to or whatever by maybe having a pre-placed military unit on that cliff and saying, hey, that guy has a rifle, so he's ranged, and so he could actually shoot enemies as they're coming in. And you kind of make this, the cogs turn on your own dime, right? We don't need to have a dialogue event telling you to do that. So we're not condescending. We're just giving you this sandbox that is biased towards you surviving. Not necessarily towards you winning, but towards you surviving, and then we let you do the thing, right? And so the way that it comes back into replayability is that in this tutorial content or this beginner-friendly content, it would be up to you and some obviously dialogue events that may be a little bit more on the handholdy side, but again, not condescending in a sense where we just expect you to, listen to the narrator, like in Warcraft 3. I always think of the narrator for some reason, and he's just like, very good. Now move your unit 2 feet north. It's like, bro, what the hell, man? I know, come on, I'm not like a 5-year-old or whatever. So anyway, you go through that and you're playing the game and you're playing this content. We want the enemy to be, understandable from the first time. So if you get attacked at 5 minutes or 2 minutes or whatever, and you die to that, you lose to that, the next time around in this early beginner-friendly mission, you'll probably get attacked at the same time. And that will build this habit, this cycle. You'll be able to understand, all right, this enemy attacks me at this time consistently, so I should be prepared for that. And then the more we get further into content, right, the more veteran level the content becomes, the more skill demanding we want the content to be. That's when content will become more replayable. So we actually don't expect the first mission of, for example, To Touch the Sun, the campaign for CMBW, to be as replayable. It still will be more replayable than your average campaign mission, but the dynamic elements within it are sort of cordoned off to later in the game. There's the opening 5 to 6 minutes is going to be fairly consistent because we want players to be able to learn the attack comes at this time, roughly. The attack consists of roughly this amount of units. After that attack, the enemy expands at this position always, every time, unless I somehow stop it or whatever. And, we allow the game to adapt a little bit later on, whereas from the word go in some of the later missions, the AI is going to have a pool of strategies they can pick from, and they will make decisions from the very beginning before you have time to scout them and see what they are, and you'll scout them. That will obviously incentivize you to scout them to begin with, so you can figure out what they're actually doing, because they won't be doing the same consistent thing, right? So the opening gambits being different from map to map, from run to run, is a main source of replayability. The fact that the tech tree is so expansive, has so many options, means that you yourself can change up your situation in the very unlikely event that your allies and your enemies are all doing the same exact things and all of the dynamic events are actually the same from one run to the next. It's very unlikely that that happens. But even if we were to think about the hypothetical scenario where it does happen, you yourself could be the dynamic event, because you can decide, I want to try a different unit composition, I want to try a different strategy, and so on and so forth. And I think that's going to be the main focus for that. Obviously, something that I talked about at the beginning of this stream was, in fact, that when you are playing the game and you have a dialogue event, the first time you hear that dialogue event is going to be the full dialogue event. But the second time you hear it is going to be a cut down version, because you already heard the first one. So you just need to know the cliff notes as a reminder, maybe. You've played this mission a long time ago and you didn't decide to reset the dialogue bank, so you're just going to still get the cut down versions of those. Okay, well, I remember that the Zerg arrive at some point, but I don't know when. And then you get a cut down version saying Zerg have arrived or whatever. That would be one example of we're not making you sit through everything over and over again. And this also really helps when you're restarting the mission over and over again because you keep losing. It stops you from becoming really tilted at like the same dialogue event over and over again. And I found when that dialogue event is much terser and maybe there's like a couple variants of that or whatever, and it becomes less abrasive over time. It's really funny because the permission to speak freely, sir line is actually better tutorialization than the rest of the campaign, the rest of that tutorial, because it actually does say, like, I mean, it's a little bit fourth walling or whatever, where I don't really like the dialogue telling you what buttons to press. But that rides the line. He's like, give us an attack command. He says, use the attack command or whatever. Like, I would do that a little bit differently. I was like, you give us an attack command, we're going to attack that to that direction. But if you want us to ignore enemy fire, you got to tell us to move there or whatever. I don't know. You could do something where that's a little bit more on the side of immersion. It's still a little bit condescending because it assumes that you've never played an RTS game before. But at that time, RTSs were still very new. We're targeting an enthusiast crowd who wants to learn. So, there will be control scheme diagrams or whatever for people who really don't know the control scheme or want to make sure that they do know the control scheme. But I don't think we need to work that into actual tutorial content because the idea is you've played an RTS before, or you're at least, maybe you played a MOBA before and they use pretty similar control schemes actually.